This video is going to be a follow-up to the recent video that I did on updates to the ESV and why I like the approach that the ESV takes to updating its text. And I read this statement some in that video. There was something that I left out that I did want to mention, or an issue that I think people are going to bring up, and that is the question of why do we even need to update Bible translations at all? I'm sure there are some people who would say, in reference to this subject, that their opinion is we should never even need to update a Bible translation, or not for an extremely long time. So I want to talk about that in this video. One thing that I wanted to say about that is actually I think that the statement from Crossway addresses this issue a little bit, because remember, initially they were kind of saying the same thing, that they were just going to have a permanent text and not do any more updates. But they realized, I think from people who responded to them, that was part of what played into this, that maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe it is actually good to do updates at times. So here's what they said. They said, Crossway remains as strong as ever to serve future generations with a stable ESV text, but the means to that goal we now see is not to establish a permanent text, but rather to allow for ongoing periodic updating of the text to reflect the realities of biblical scholarship, such as textual discoveries or changes in English over time. So those are two issues that they say may lead to the need for an update: textual discoveries and changes in English over time. They also do say here, and I commented on this a lot, that these kinds of updates will be minimal and infrequent, which I said is a good approach. But the point is that there could be a need to update a Bible translation because of textual discoveries, which is one important thing, but also just changes in English over time. So I think it's that second point that people are probably going to take more issue with, the issue of updating because of changes in English. And I noticed that seems to be where people have a lot more contention about Bible translations updating. So I did want to make some comments about that, because I actually do think, for the reasons they said, it is good to update Bible translations at times. I think we can do it too frequently, too quickly, and maybe, not always for the best reasons. But if it's because of textual discoveries, academic insights, that's fine. But also changes in English, I think that's legitimate. Now, it's probably true that a lot of translations are updating more than they need to when it comes to changes in English. On the other hand, here's a really important question if you're resistant to the idea of updates. How many people use the American Standard Version versus the New American Standard Bible, which is an update of the American Standard Version? And I think what you can see is that most people use the update because it is more accessible English. Also, the scholarship, yes, discoveries, I'm sure that plays into it, but to a large degree it just has to do with what is a translation that is accurate but still speaks to me in an understandable way. And the New American Standard Bible is an update of an existing translation. Now, of course, we've talked about the New American Standard Bible on this channel having updates within its own translation. So you have the NASB 77, the NASB 95, the NASB 2020. But the point is, even if you're using the NASB 77, you are using an update of a previous translation. So it shows you there is a usefulness to updates. If there weren't, I think then people would just be using the American Standard Version if they like that particular stream of translation. Now, I'm sure there are people out there, I'm probably going to get a comment on someone who says, that's exactly what I use. I use the American Standard Version, but not very many people. On the other hand, there are people who use the King James Version, and I think that's one that's going to be brought up. However, even the King James Version has an update, the New King James Version, which is meant to represent the King James Version in a more modern English setting. So the New King James Version is consciously trying to be really the King James Version for today, and hence the name New King James Version. And there are people who use the New King James Version who are still really resistant to updates. But if you're using the New King James Version, you are using an update of an existing translation. Now, this leads to the question, when would you need to update a translation like the New King James Version? And I'm not really trying to answer that in this video. I'm simply saying that at some point, if you are using the New King James Version, you would probably have to say, well, since I'm already using an updated version of the King James Version, then perhaps at some point in the future, we would need an update of the New King James Version. And that's really the point of this video, that at some point it does make sense to update Bible translations. Again, we could probably have different points of view and factors we could bring out as to when those updates are optimal, when is the best time to do a Bible translation update. And I know many people in my audience would probably say, we need to wait a lot longer than a lot of translations are waiting in between their different editions, their different updates. On the other hand, the longer you wait, the bigger deal it is when you do an update. So I've said this before, the NIV, they waited quite a while to do the major update from 1984 to 2011, and when they did that update, it was a big deal. Now, part of that was some of the kinds of changes that they made with gender. I've talked about that before. But part of it is just if you have a translation that in people's minds becomes how they think of that translation, and you wait a long time and then do a major change on it, that can be really hard for people. So I'd like to hear what you think about this. Again, my feeling on this is that it's actually better overall to do small updates, not that frequently, but if you need to do updates to tweak things or to make some adjustments based on new discoveries, that can be helpful, but also language changes over time. It's good for those reasons to make some updates. And a lot of people have pointed this out, by the way, with the King James Version, that even though there are many people who say they use the 1611 King James Version, that's what they hold to, actually they're using an update of the King James Version from 1769. Now, maybe a lot of those changes just have to do with the way that the letters are formed, the typography, the typeset design, all of that. Some of the spelling, maybe perhaps. But that's the point, is that there is a difference in 1769 versus 1611 in terms of how the Bible is presented. And so it just again reinforces what I'm saying in this video. There are valid reasons, I believe, to do updates. So I'd like to know, what would your approach be? Do you agree with me that these small changes we've seen with the ESV, and again, the reason I think that's a good thing is because the ESV has a more unified user base. There are people who think, no, it's better to have a major update, wait a long time, do a major update. But what I have seen in practice is that tends to divide the user base. And you can go back and watch my previous video to see a little bit more what I have to say about that. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you think in the comment section below. But thank you so much for taking some time to listen to some of my thoughts on this, brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.